This is episode 506 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, it looks like we do have a date for Virgin Galactic to fly out of Spaceport America here on May 25th. That is when the launch window opens. We've talked about it a little bit, but yeah, best of luck. Godspeed to those folks, and we'll see if that contributes to Virgin Galactic finally getting things off the ground, as it were.
Yes, best of luck to them all the way around, and we will see. So yes, as we've talked, and others have talked on this podcast, they've got to be able to do this more than once to make it a success. But to have the best way to get a long string of launches is to get the first one under their belt, and so hopefully that will go off well.
Yeah, and of course, the last time they flew was in July of 2021. Richard Branson was on that one. That was a pretty big deal internationally. A lot of eyeballs on that. I watched it myself. We'll see what happens in this particular instance, if it achieves the same amount of notoriety and attention. But yeah, we'll pull for them and see where things go. More immediate and more, I think, very interesting, really, is the governor's recent speech to the Politico Energy Summit. She joins Politico, which is a magazine. I think they're, out of Washington. They certainly cover and make their money covering Washington, D.C.'s political situation. But of course, focus on issues like energy. And so the governor zoomed in essentially and talked to the audience there. And Wally, one of the things about having the video of a political speech is that you get to go into it and actually see what they're saying. And I just started watching this thing, and I realized that there were a lot of whoppers in there. Whoppers as in things that she said were so that just aren't real facts. And I wanted to go through some of these, and feel free to jump in at any point here, but I'm just going to go. And I have a post here at airsofenchantment.com. This is a bit more interactive than most because I timestamp all of her misstatements or fibs. And it's not like she's necessarily fumbling and stumbling and just searching for things to talk about. She seemed to have these talking points all lined up, and I guess they don't fact check their talking points at the Lujan Grisham administration. Well, starting out, she said we're one of the only states that's moving out of poverty. A May 3rd, 2023 Farmington Daily Times article was headlined, New Mexico again at third highest poverty rate in the United States in 2021. Of course, that's the latest data available. State's national ranking has changed little over the last several years. So there you go. Next, the governor claimed that New Mexico, and this one's just bizarre. She said we have the largest wind farm in North America right here in New Mexico. I looked very diligently. I found a January 2023 list of the top 5 wind farms in the United States. That was Construction Review Online. None of those were from New Mexico. And then a March 23 article stated that Roscoe Wind Farm near Dallas was the largest. That was from power-technology.com. I searched high and low and could not find anything about New Mexico having the world's largest wind farm or North America's largest wind farm, let alone the United States' largest wind farm.
Yeah, Paul, and not necessarily in that statement, but on other statements that the governor's made, there's usually not even a breadcrumb to the source, and so she could have said the such and such plant, so we might be able to find it. And so, do we have it planned? Who knows? What is considered a wind farm? Are we counting the whole state compared to something else? I don't know, but yeah, this is an issue that I really have quite a lot. It's like she definitely doesn't put footnotes in her political speeches.
Yeah, and that's one of the beauties of having the thing on video, because it really helps when and I wasn't watching this with the intent of fact checking the whole thing, but boy, once the lies started flowing, I decided to go ahead and do it. Now, not so much a lie, but her next point really is what spurred me to look at this whole thing at the beginning, because this whole issue of her vetoes of the electric vehicle credits and the charging station credits and the tax bill, and the governor told these people that they were too small. This is interesting, because while we agree with her on the vetoes themselves, her environmentalist allies were very much upset by those vetoes. Now,
and they've actually called, BULL and some other letters on her explanation. The enviro groups have. So I don't know. That's one of those. Who know what is going on there? So somebody doesn't have their story right, and it's tough to tell who that is.
Yeah, and again, just to reiterate, we agree with the governor on the policy decision of vetoing these special interest tax credits, but her environmental and political base does not, and I find the whole thing very strange. Then she quickly moved on to claim that budgetary pressures, and I remember when this all went down in Kansas, they had tried to enact some significant tax reform, but they didn't do anything about spending, and that may work a little bit at the national level, but it doesn't work very well when you have a balanced budget requirement. In Kansas, the governor says had to go to 3-day school weeks. Now, I thought that was a little questionable, so I very easily Google 3-day school weeks, and I looked specifically at Kansas. I did find several instances of Kansas schools having gone to 4-day school weeks, and an analysis, an article from Fox 4 Kansas City, actually said that the option is becoming popular in Kansas and Missouri. They said that it saves money for the districts. They were able to get 25 more instructional hours in the school year than before, because I guess they had a 1 day a week that was a shorter day.
Right.
And they also said that the ACT scores have shown some improvements. And overall, it seems like attendance has improved for students and staff, because you no longer, if you say you have Friday off every week and you're in a 4-day school week, then you can do all your doctor's appointments and all of your kind of stuff that you have to do that kids often have requirements. They can do that on that day. I'm certainly didn't want to go down the rabbit hole of, well, New Mexico should do 4-day school weeks, but
back to the original point, that was to somehow justify that you shouldn't cut taxes,
right,
because it never goes well. So you would have to say at some level she maybe cherry picked a little bit, because a lot of states have cut taxes in the last decade, and that list looks pretty good with regard to how they're doing from an economic point of view. So
yeah, taking the one example of a state that overdid it on the tax reductions and didn't cut spending, and then the worst case scenario that she can come up with is 3-day, which is not correct, actually 4-day, and that actually worked out. It's a real winner of an example there.
Well, it's a little bit like the feds, the Washington Monument. If we cut spending $1, it will shut down the Washington Monument or the Statue of Liberty or whatever. Yeah, not a good example. So,
yeah. So then she goes on to claim, and this is another Democrat on Democrat issue, that she claims the tax cuts of 2022, that HB 163 were the largest in New Mexico history. They were $500 million. Now, I went through the fiscal impact report and I found $424 million as of fiscal year 2026, which 2026 we're not quite there yet, but they may get to $500 million eventually. But normally, the way I look at these claims in general is that I look at the maximum year. So some of them are phased in, or so you have a 3-year fiscal impact report. I look at the highest year available. $424 million is a long way off from $500 million, but I look back at Bill Richardson, another Democrat. His tax cut of 2003, also passed by a Democrat-controlled legislature, reduced taxes by $524 million. Now, that's adjusted for inflation based on 2003 to 2023, not 2026. And his tax cuts were much bigger overall. And by the way, most Democrats, many of whom now don't like and want to repeal Bill Richardson's tax reductions.
It's held up. It's held up as a item of disdain among many Democrats in New Mexico.
Yeah. So that was just a weird one. No need to say these are the biggest in New Mexico history. Okay, maybe in nominal terms they were, but again, it's just like we did better on COVID than Texas. Well, we may have had fewer COVID deaths than Texas, but Texas is something on the order of 30 times the size of us population-wise. So I think those data points, again, it's clear. The thing is that it's not that she made a misstatement. It's that, she's not Joe Biden up there, just to throw it out. She is making these in cold, calculated, these are my talking points approaches.
Yeah. She or one of her staff wrote these down on a card or a piece of paper for her to say.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Your state is, a moderator says, your state is not on track to meet its clean energy goals. And then after saying, yes, we are, and then attempting to justify that statement somewhat, Michelle Lujan Grisham goes on to say, well, we have free college. I'm producing more workers in the energy sector, renewable energy sector, that is. So just talk about a bait and switch there. And then the final point, and this one's probably the biggest, most bizarre statement that she made in the entire thing, completely. So she literally goes into this after saying, I'm producing more workers in the renewable energy sector. She says, New Mexico was framed, and then she kind of restarts and said, and in fact, I do agree with that frame. I do disagree with that frame as an energy state and a leader in energy. And I pulled this down off of the screen so you can see it at the Errors of Enchantment.
And Paul, because I read conflicting reports about that, and then I was like, I've got to see what she actually said. And who knows what she said? It was very confusing. But
I made sure to get the context in there because I didn't want it to be
cherry picking, and I don't. But we talked briefly about this before we started recording this morning. I think what she wanted to say, giving her the benefit of the doubt, is that she's trying to reframe New Mexico from oil and gas only to broader energy. But I'm not sure she said that. What is your take on what she
clearly
said?
Didn't say it. There is no way on this planet that you can make the statement that New Mexico is not an energy leader. I think to the extent that you're correct in that she wants to frame New Mexico as being a leader in green energy or renewable energy. And again,
but that could be it. So we're not a leader if we just have oil and gas. We have to do something else to be a leader. That could have been it. But anyway, not the clearest statement. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and even that very charitable approach is very hard to kind of get behind. Yes, New Mexico does. First and foremost, we don't have hydroelectric, and I know we're going to talk about hydroelectric a little bit later, but having lots of hydroelectric is kind of the born on third base equivalent for renewable energy.
Right.
Hydroelectric tends to work as an energy source, whereas wind and solar are very much debatable as to their real merits in the energy supply. But
yeah, and just before we leave that one point, Paul,
sure.
Why you brought it up is that, wind and solar don't work many places. They happen to work relatively well in New Mexico.
Right.
They don't work in Germany, where they put in solar and wind and it's a big disaster. And they won't work in upstate New York and much of the East, where it's too far north and too cloudy. So we have a lot going for us in the energy specter, no matter what, what kind of energy it is. But yeah, but we're not a leader, but maybe we will be.
So I have the governor's full talk posted at Heirs of Enchantment, and it's about 20 minutes or so. It's actually a horrendous recording because, again, she's doing this via Zoom or something. And
right.
Her one of the pet peeves I have with anything on television, especially streaming, is when the lips don't line up with what you're saying. So not watching it is definitely the way to do this. So do something else with it on in the background. And I put that clip of her saying that New Mexico is not an energy leader. I mean, we are the second leading producer of oil. We are top 10 in natural gas. We're a state that has been at the focus of energy from day one with the nuclear program. They do bring up Holtec during the conversation, but she just basically says, I don't want it. And so it really wasn't worth talking about in this particular conversation. So it is a worthwhile conversation. And the lies are not done yet, because in a separate, I think, interview on MSNBC, the governor claimed that AR-15s are automatic weapons. And she seemed to conflate them, saying AR stands for assault rifle, when it actually means something completely
Armalite
different.
Is, I believe,
Armalite,
it's the company, yeah.
And it's a gun type that's been around since the 1950s.
And Armalite was a company that produced one of the original models of those. And it's a semi-automatic, right. And there's a big difference between semi-automatic and automatic. Semi-automatic
legality, among others.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
basically not legal.
Yes, and I've actually shot both. An automatic weapon, also known as a machine gun, you pull the trigger and it keeps firing out projectiles until your clip is empty or it jams, whichever comes first. And a semi-automatic, you get one for each pull of the trigger. So those are two separate things. And then that whole thing about calling AR assault rifle, they've got to know this. This has been around. This point's been debated. You either totally haven't done your homework, or this is a mistake that's made in this gun debate so often that I'm to the point where it's like, yeah, they know. They just don't care. They like that. That's good messaging for them to say AR means
right.
rifle.
I'm not the world's foremost expert on guns by any stretch of the imagination. That's why I talk to guys like Zach Fort and others, Mark Abramson from Los Ranchos Gun Shop. But it took me all of 5 seconds to do a Google search as to what AR-15 stands for and are they automatic weapons. It comes up readily, even on a left-wing search engine like Google. So it gets back to, Wally, that definition of apathy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Are we ignorant or apathetic? We don't know and we don't care, but we have political talking points and we're going to make them on the issues that we want to make them on. So
exactly. So, Wally, you can. I don't know that it's a rule or an axiom, but it certainly is one of your better sayings. So kudos on that.
Very good.
California has exempted a celebrity chef from its gas stove ban. And, this is the kind of thing that I think, especially pre-COVID, we all kind of knew happened. If you had specific favors, if you were powerful enough, you got your way. But, when you had Governor Lujan Grisham getting her hair done and getting jewelry, and you had Gavin Newsom having parties at the French Laundry when everybody else was supposed to be locked down in their basements and not seeing anybody. Now we have a celebrity chef who I don't have a problem with him making this statement, but Jose Andres, I'm not a big celebrity chef follower, not a name I'm familiar with, but he was reportedly going to be starting a restaurant in Palo Alto, which is home to Stanford University and has a gas stove ban in place. They said, he said, I am going to not locate this restaurant there. And the attorney for Mr. Andres went on to say, only natural gas appliances grant him the ability to achieve his signature complex flavors, which take that, Martin Heinrich. Anyway, the gas stove issue continues, and kudos to Mr. Andres for getting his restaurant apparently shoved through in terms of having natural gas stoves. But it just shows that if you have connections and power and money, whatever the government does to inconvenience the rest of us, you may be able to avoid. And in this case, that is gas stoves, which apparently allow cooks to achieve their signature complex flavors.
Oh, very good. So, Paul, I think I need it for my signature complex flavors as well in my house. So
I agree.
Yep.
I agree. And you have me over to dinner. I'll make sure to tell the politicians here in New Mexico, and I'll even take it all the way to the top in Biden, and we'll have that conversation. So
very good.
Yeah, it's the way of the world these days. All right, higher education. University of New Mexico was reported the budget that they are working on. So next year's budget, essentially, obviously, that begins at the beginning of July, and so a lot of places are putting finishing touches on their budgets. UNM, there's topped $1 billion for main campus. Their overall budget, $4.1 billion, jumping 9.2% from the year before, includes the health system there at UNM. And it's nothing new for the state of New Mexico. Our higher education spending is seventh highest in the entire country. We trail just a handful of states: Hawaii, Alaska, Wyoming, Illinois, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and then there's New Mexico, and that's per full-time equivalent student, $11,564 per full-time student, according to the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. I believe that's the subsidized component there. So you're talking big bucks in the past. This is 2021 data. You're talking bigger bucks thanks to free college coming up, not to mention all the inflation and just the overall costs that have really hit all of our economy. So we're going to pour a lot of money into higher education in the years to come. And like everything else that we all deal with here at the Rio Grande Foundation, what are we going to get for all this money?
Well, Paul, New Mexico has a lot of money and we can do a lot of things, some of which make sense and some of which may not make sense. And this, though, goes on against the backdrop of a value of college education. And that's at the underlying core a really, really big issue. And so, a state like New Mexico can pay for college, but depending on what you're getting to your degree in and whether you actually get a degree, will that have that much value for you? I mean, I think that is the bigger conversation. And when we look at, the dropout rates of high school in New Mexico, obviously you're not going to be going to college then. You look at the low graduation rates of our state colleges, some of which probably honestly would be due to the fact that it doesn't cost that much to go to college here. So you don't have that much skin in the game. You're like, what if I flunk out? It wasn't my money anyway. So a lot of problems with higher ed. And I guess the bottom line is that in the short term, this is really, really good for UNM. But boy, if we ever come to a time where the state government money ceases to flow in a major way, and they're having to compete in the market, for students and the value that those educations provide, with lower subsidies. They'll always be subsidized, a state college by definition, but they may be facing some real problems, and certainly don't have an incentive to reform their product of the quality of the education if the money comes in no matter what.
Yeah. Boy, there's a lot that you could say about higher education, but certainly New Mexico does subsidize it very heavily. And even with that, UNM, NMSU to a lesser extent, but you don't have a lot of people coming to New Mexico for higher education. it's a state that people stay home and go to college, and with a relatively poor K-12 system, you're not going to have UNM and other institutions performing at a particularly high level when you rank them against other states. New Mexico Tech is certainly an exception. NMSU has certain areas where they really excel, and so does UNM. And we've talked about this with Preston Cooper and others on our podcast. But overall, when it all comes out in the wash, we're certainly not seen as a place, oh, you want to go to University of New Mexico, or you want to move from one state to the other to take advantage of this fantastic education system, this higher education.
Yeah, and then the people who do come here, it tends to be very, very focused on science, technology, engineering, math, those sorts of hard disciplines. Which starting with tech, but New Mexico State and UNM has some good programs in that regard, and a lot of foreign students there. Come. They don't. You don't come to New Mexico to get an art history degree. That's the bottom line. If you come here and go into one of our schools, it's overwhelmingly in one of those scientific, engineering, math disciplines.
Yeah. Back to Michelle Lujan Grisham, the governor, and we've talked about her vetoes of the alcohol taxes. We've talked about those vetoes of that tax bill a lot because it has been something that has angered our friends on the left. The New Mexico In-Depth had another column. This one they quote folks from the far left, Cedillo Lopez, Democrat from Albuquerque, Ferrari, some of the supporters of higher taxes on alcohol. And that was included in the final tax package, as we've discussed. RGF is definitely on the record opposing increased alcohol taxes, but something that we have agreed with, Mexico Restaurant Association was quoted in this article. Others more on the center and center right of the political spectrum would be more than happy to see what Senator Jerry Ortiz y Pino, a progressive Democrat, said, which was to shift some of the alcohol tax revenues from the general fund to treating alcohol abuse and misuse. And that'd be about $24 million at current rates, rather than sending that onto the general fund, especially with the kind of budget surplus, again, we're facing. And this gets into the governor claiming that mantle of fiscal conservative. Well, $24 million lost to the state's general fund from shifting alcohol taxes towards alcohol treatment is a drop in the bucket. And especially if all of these problems are as big as everybody claims that they are, that you're wanting to raise taxes, as a very basic starting point, you would think that these programs should receive this kind of funding. I'm talking about alcohol treatment. It's just more mind-blowing craziness from our governor. And, while I disagree with the left on higher alcohol taxes, I certainly empathize with them on the treatment side of things. So just bizarre, more bizarreness, Wally.
Yeah, and this for me brings the point home that there's really an incredible lack of focus and priorities in this last legislative session as regard to what problems the state face and what programs deserve money. It was just this kind of I don't know, throw the spaghetti against the wall and see if it sticks is how it ended up being in the end. And this is just one of the casualties. Do they have enough money in Santa Fe to put more money in alcohol treatment programs? Yes, they do. Whether they increased the tax, devoted the tax to that purpose, or just took it out of the general fund. But then it gets just mixed up in this weird political thing about some people like taxes of all kinds, some don't, and then the explanations for any of these programs on either side just come away leaving at least me confused. So,
yeah, it's just bizarre to watch and see the priorities or lack thereof. And in New Mexico, of course, Republicans are criticized rather justifiably for their inability to run and win elections. Democrats, though, unless they're in a year like 2019, where you had 8 years of Susana Martinez kind of putting a clamp down on things and vetoing bills, you had kind of a flood of, well, gee, 8 years of priorities built up for the Democrats, and they've just been itching to do something kind of on that liberal side of things. When they actually get into office, they tend to not have much of a clue as to what to actually do outside of a few of their hot button issues right now. And we talked about this last week, actually on my interview of Jody Hendricks, about when it came to abortion, transgender care, voting issues. They not only had a plan, they stuck to their plan, and the plan involved kind of a very tightly fitting, interlocking group of pieces of legislation. Whereas when it comes to everything from alcohol abuse to alcohol taxes to green energy and you name it, pretty much anything outside of that narrow priority list, which, to be fair, the governor did run on, they're like babes lost in the wilderness.
Yes.
They have no clue.
Yeah. Well, and our legislators did remind me of somebody who had recently won the lottery, and they couldn't conceive of how much money they had, and they certainly didn't have a clear vision for how to best deploy it. And just so you know, when we talk deploy, you can always cut taxes. Man, just think about what if they would have done that. But that didn't even get a hearing in Santa Fe. You know, it's like they tabled that so quickly that they didn't even want to talk about that. So I don't know. If they had something else, you could say, the fix was in. No wonder they're not going to cut taxes. They had all these big spending plans. But the fact of the matter is, at least with hindsight to hate us, they did not.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about the Democrats' cluelessness. And I guess what the Republicans in New Mexico have to hope for is that the broad base of the Democratic Party gets frustrated enough by what they're not delivering on. Now, I don't want to beat this dead horse, but boy, you're not going to get that out of the progressives. The progressives, who are by and large criticizing the governor on her environmental vetoes and her alcohol vetoes, to name just two, those people, you know, they never have to vote for Michelle Lujan Grisham again. They can always vote for whoever runs next, Martin Heinrich or somebody else. I guess the connection or disconnect has to be with the run-of-the-mill moderate Democrat who just says, these people are incompetent, I'm going a different direction. For whatever reason, if it's these or some other bills, or heaven forbid, things that we talk about on this show, it just seems that that's where the tipping point has to be, because the Republicans certainly haven't shown any sudden ability to frame the issues and make the case for themselves. And of course, they have the headwind of what's going on in Washington and national political voices that I think could burden or benefit them. But you know, that's nothing new in New Mexico. We've this has been a Democrat state for the better part of 100 years, and it's not like recent political events have suddenly made New Mexico more inhospitable to Republicans than before. It's always been inhospitable territory for Republicans. Just maybe, some of those races like Pete Domenici Senate seat and Pierce being in Congress and Heather Wilson being in Congress and Schiff and some of these other guys, you had that presence that was balancing things out a little bit in New Mexico, while the state was definitely under Democrat control. So
yeah,
anyway.
And Paul, your point about there is no more voting for Michelle Lujan Grisham for governor,
right. But
politically, does that mean that now that the progressives have, I don't know if you say they spanked her, but they frowned. They're like, oh, we're so disappointed in you. So does she come back to them for the remainder of her term, or does she say, you deign to call my judgment into question, I'm going to move away from you? And then you get into these questions about, what does she want? There's this thing in politics that I think is horrible, by the way. In their last couple of years, second-term politicians sometimes say, "Oh, I need to start thinking about my legacy." I think your legacy is really built what you do from day one of when you're elected until you're there. But yeah, it just brings into play a lot of possibilities that I don't think people thought, both on the very far left and maybe even more moderate policies for the remainder of the Lujan Grisham administration here in New Mexico.
Well, as I think I've said on this show, and certainly have said to myself and others, the governor could work with. She needs moderate Democrats to join Republicans, but she could do something like I recommended, is to veto the tax bill in its entirety, and then do the pyramiding. Tell the legislature, do the pyramiding, reduce the rate of the GRT, and she can take credit not only for pro-business policy, but also progressive policy. And whether the progressives like that and say, "Oh, that's progressive enough," or not, and my suspicion is that the Voices for Children crowd will, even though gross receipts tax is regressive by nature,
it hurts their constituency the worst. That doesn't matter because they love taxes.
Right. So it's something that I think would be a very smart political move. I actually really do. I would love to see that, not just because that would hit some priorities for us, but eventually Democrats in New Mexico are going to have to push back on the progressive leftward tilt of their party. This state, philosophically, the average Democrat in this state is not the same as a California Democrat. And the sooner that New Mexico's Democrats realize that, the better for them, for us, and everybody. So, all right, we're going to move on relatively quickly. California had notably wet winter and spring, rain falling in Los Angeles and Southern California, epic amounts of snow, and the pictures are incredible from the Sierra Nevadas and other locations. And we talked about hydroelectric, and kind of that is the low-hanging fruit when it comes to clean energy. Certainly renewable energy, traditional renewable energy. It's certainly pretty inexpensive too, even relative to nuclear. But California, in a typical year, gets about 10 to 15% of its electricity from hydroelectric, and they've been struggling in recent years with the drought. That's the thing that hydro is not so good with, is if you have a drought, that means you don't have as much power as you would otherwise be accustomed to. And this has big implications for not just California this summer, but for us right here in New Mexico. And so far, we've been blessed here as we are in late May with relatively cool temperatures, and I haven't seen a 90-degree on my weather app that indicates, early June, you can bet we're not just in the 90s, but that's when things start to hit close to 100. And the month of June tends to be a pretty hot and dry month around here. But if we have those cooler temps and robust hydro out of California, that could prevent the kinds of blackouts and brownouts that we have been talking about, and PNM had been talking about. We didn't just make that up out of whole cloth. We were getting information as reported in the media from PNM. So we hope this is the case.
Yeah, and just to PNM making the statement, when your largest utility says to its regulators in a public forum, "We're concerned about keeping the lights on," you probably ought to listen to them. It's one of those things. That's not a statement that any utility wants to make. So.
No, you're not going to be the boy who cried wolf when it comes to that. If you are the utility, you want to you want to give everybody the impression that everything is hunky dory and no generators necessary. So, I'm not going to say that we will necessarily escape this summer without any issues, but I certainly hope that we do not have them.
Yeah, and yes, just to your point, Paul, this is the absolute nicest May I can ever remember in the state of New Mexico. Not really cold, but cool and little rain, and the clouds look like summer clouds, but without the big thunderstorms. And yeah, and so if that continues into June, June is usually a bigger problem from an electricity point of view than July. So
right. Yeah, we have 5 seasons here in New Mexico, or at least in Albuquerque area, as I say. You have we throw in monsoon summer and the dry summer. Yeah. All right. Well, as things continue in Washington with the debt ceiling, folks like Martin Heinrich blame Republicans and the Trump tax cuts. One thing that is for sure is that federal revenues are not, the problem here. In fact, federal revenues are higher than they were before the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. That's according to income, payroll, and corporate tax revenues from the Daily Signal. We've seen more revenues flowing into federal coffers. Now, whether that tracks with where expectations would be is anybody's guess, but we have a bipartisan spending problem in the United States, and the Democrats in Washington seem to just want to spend more with no accountability, no checks. Trump, and I said this at the time, I felt like the COVID bailouts and a lot of the policies enacted under Trump were a big mistake, not just politically, but economically. Did Democrats vote against them? No, heck no. They sucked every dollar they could out of Donald Trump and wanted more.
Yeah, and then did a round 2 and round 3, sometimes at even higher levels.
So anyway, it's amazing. Again, now this is clearly folks like Heinrich trying to manipulate the agenda or the narrative to his perspective. But I will gladly call Republicans and Democrats to task, and I will even say that the best this nation has been on a fiscal basis in terms of its outright management was under Bill Clinton with Newt Gingrich.
Yeah, I thought that's what you're going to say. That was a very powerful fiscal conservative force, and they didn't go all the way what people thought needed to be done, but compared to the time before and after, that was a pretty stellar management of the fiscal.
It also helped that the Cold War had come to an end. Yeah. The tech boom, technology sector was really getting ramped up. But whatever happens in Washington on this debt ceiling issue, there is certainly bipartisan blame to go around. But the idea that you can lay all or really even much of this at all at the Trump tax cuts is very, very hard to make that statement honestly. And no surprise that our congressional delegation, of course, is out there banging the drum, leading that talking point out there. And really, that's what it's come down to. We'll see. I suspect that this is more of a much ado about nothing situation, that they'll come to some agreement, because the one thing that they do have the incentive, bipartisan in a bipartisan way to do is to continue the strength of the dollar on into the future. And if that means a few less dollars spent by the Democrats and Republicans, they at least will have that strong dollar to continue to spend into the future. Losing that and defaulting, if that is really as bad as they say, is something that will harm both parties.
Yeah, and there is a lot of risk in these. Although I'm with you, I'm putting this in this snoozer category right now. But the fact that things are so contentious in Washington, they could take it a little farther than they usually do. And the Republicans talk a good game on fiscal responsibility and have not really delivered policy nearly to the extent that that could have happened over the past couple of decades. And then the Democrats are just comical. If you put any limit on any spending of any kind. You know, they're like, the sky is falling, the end is near. You can't, how dare you try to rein in spending on anything, even a little bit. That will destroy our country. So there's blame to go around on both sides. No question about that.
Yeah. And last but not least, here locally, this whole idea, the free bus argument just is bizarre to me. Even homeless people can come up with $1 for bus fare in the city of Albuquerque and really across the country. John Stossel, when he was, I think, at ABC News, went and dressed as a homeless person, and you get a lot of. He actually got a lot of money. Now that's New York, but Albuquerque, generally the same way. But this woman named Rachel Swanson Franz of the Zero Fares Coalition wrote an article in the Albuquerque Journal and really made utterly no points. And this is, I guess, the flip side of the Michelle Lujan Grisham thing, where you make false statements to assert your position. This lady didn't really make any statements that were relevant. Basically, ignore the 10 out of 31 individuals in a shoplifting ring that used the city bus as their escape vehicle. Like that's the only 10 shoplifters in the entire city. They only did the sting of 31 people. It's not like you can just walk up to them like you're taking a survey.
Yeah.
And just this whole idea of that somehow zero fares. If you want to make the case for zero fares, find out, do a survey, have somebody in the transit department do a survey of people coming on the bus and ask them what they're doing and how impacted they are by the zero fares program. And if that number comes up as a big number, then I think that is something to consider. Now, you have to also look at, of course, as we've reported, ridership on the buses in Albuquerque and transit across the country has dropped precipitously during COVID and has not anywhere near recovered. In 2016, we had about 11 million bus riders in the city of Albuquerque. That number is now close to $6 million, and that's up from where it was in 2021 and 2020. So,
6 million passenger trips, is that right? 11 to 6?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's just, it drives me nuts as a policy person. And I don't know, again, if we are at a point in our society, in our city, in our state, where making factual arguments is just irrelevant, and that's good enough to get policies done. I mean, we know that the governor, during her quote-unquote campaign, made abortion and Donald Trump the main issues. And, like it or not, abortion is a real issue, and there was a stark and clear difference between the two candidates, and Ron Ketty, quite frankly, stumbled on that particular issue. But nobody outside of a handful, free transit is much more like transgenderism. The number of people that actually this applies to is very, very small, I believe. And it just makes me crazy that we have this tiny, tiny, tiny interest group that has been able to, and I'm talking about the free transit, that they've been able to impose their will through a relatively responsible, sound city council. These are not Tim Keller's handpicked city councilors. Right. So anyway, sorry, that's my rampage for the day.
No, and just one final thought on that, and the free transit may be, in fact, destroying the transit system.
Exactly.
Bus drivers don't want to do it, and then instead of helping the people you purport to help, those that need this transit to get to jobs and to get to medical care, they can't do it because it's so dangerous and so disastrous. So,
yeah, all right, we will leave things there. I think this was a fascinating and exciting episode, even by our standards. So, thanks for listening, and find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.